Let me ask you something. What if you were guaranteed a spot in paradise, but when your final moments came, you were just completely terrified? We're about to explore the haunting last words of one of history's most revered leaders and what they tell us about the real nature of faith.
These were the final words of Umar ibn al-Khattab, spoken just moments after he was fatally wounded. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This is a man who commanded a vast, powerful empire. His word was law, and he was willing to trade every last piece of gold and silver imaginable just to avoid the terror of what was coming next.
And that, right there, is the central puzzle we're going to unpack. See, this wasn't just any man. This was someone who had been personally assured of his place in paradise. So, why the overwhelming fear? To understand that, we've got to go back to his final moments.
To really get what was going on in his head, we first have to understand his status. The gap between who he was and how he felt, well, that's the key to this whole story.
I mean, just look at his resume, right? He was a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad. He was the second caliph, a leader famous for his incredible sense of justice. And most importantly, he was one of the very few who was explicitly given the glad tidings of paradise. By any possible measure, he had all the spiritual assurance a person could ever hope for.
And yet, what do the historical accounts tell us? His final hours weren't filled with relief or confidence. They were defined by an intense, profound fear of standing before God for judgment. And here's the kicker. This wasn't a contradiction of his faith. It was the ultimate expression of it.
Okay, so this brings us to a really core principle that explains this whole thing. In Islamic theology, you see, true faith isn't just one or the other. It's a perfect balance between two incredibly powerful states of the heart.
These two concepts are fear and hope. Think of them like two wings of a bird. You need both to fly straight. Now, fear, or khawf, isn't what you might think. It's not about being scared of the dark. It's a deep, profound awe of God's perfect justice, paired with a very sharp awareness of your own flaws. It's what keeps you humble. Then on the other side, you have hope, or raja. This is that complete, unwavering trust in God's infinite mercy, and it's what stops you from ever falling into despair.
And you know, this balance is beautifully laid out right there in the Quran. It describes the truly devout person as someone who is fearing the hereafter and hoping for the mercy of his Lord. You see, they're presented together, they're inseparable. And that was a spiritual state Umar embodied.
For Umar, this wasn't just some intellectual idea. He lived and breathed it, especially in his final, most vulnerable moments. His actions in those last few hours, well, they speak louder than any book.
So picture this. He's lying there dying, his head resting in his son's lap, and he makes this one simple but incredibly powerful request. It was an act of pure, absolute humility before his Creator.
He insisted that his son place his cheek directly on the dirt floor. He wanted to physically humble himself as much as humanly possible, all while praying for forgiveness. This from a man who was promised paradise. It just goes to show you, he never, not for a single second, let that divine promise lead to arrogance.
Now get this, in the middle of this intense personal moment, suffering from his wounds, something else happened that reveals so much about who he was. A young man came to offer his condolences, and as he turned to leave, Umar noticed something.
Even on his deathbed, he was fulfilling his duty. He saw the young man's robe was dragging on the ground, and he advised him to lift it. It was a simple act of piety. His concern for upholding God's commands, for himself and for others, just never wavered. So, what can we take away from this powerful story? Umar's example leaves behind a timeless lesson about the nature of faith, leadership, and our own personal accountability.
So let's break it down. What are the key takeaways here? First, that true faith lives in that delicate balance between fear and hope. Second, that worldly success, even a divine promise of paradise, never, ever negates our accountability. Third, that our primary concern should always be our own standing with God. And finally, the ultimate sign of a true believer is profound, unwavering humility.
You see, in the end, Umar wasn't worried about how history would remember him as a caliph or a conqueror. His entire focus was on one thing, how he would be received by his Lord as a humble servant. And that shift in perspective, well, it changes everything.
And so this story leaves us with a question for our own lives. We live in a world that is completely obsessed with achievement, with status, with public recognition. So what can we possibly learn from a leader whose greatest concern at the very end of a triumphant life was simply to be a forgiven servant?